Wow, I almost didn't recognize you. The words sliced through the warm aroma of roasted coffee and fresh cinnamon pastries, like a blade hidden beneath velvet. For a brief moment, the chatter inside the crowded cafe seemed to fade into the background. Olivia Bennet froze with one hand wrapped around a paper cup, her fingers tightening against the cardboard sleeve. She knew that voice. Some memories never truly disappeared. They only learned how to wait. Outside, a steady October rain tapped softly against the tall windows, turning the streets of Charleston into shimmering ribbons of silver. Inside, golden pendant lights cast a welcoming glow across polished wood tables and rows of customers escaping the chilly afternoon. It should have felt comforting. Instead, Olivia felt her stomach knot. Slowly, she turned around. Ethan Walker stood near the pickup counter with the same confident posture he had carried throughout their marriage. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly. His expensive watch caught the light as he folded his arms across his chest. Beside him stood Vanessa Hart, her flawless smile already stretching wider as she recognized Olivia. The years had changed many things. Apparently, kindness was not one of them. Ethan's blue eyes swept over Olivia from head to toe before settling on her midsection. His expression shifted into amusement. "Life's been treating you pretty well, huh?" he said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. Vanessa let out a soft laugh. "Ethan," she teased, though there was no real warning in her voice. "Be nice." Olivia felt dozens of eyes drifting toward her. She had experienced this feeling before. The sensation of being examined, judged, measured against impossible standards she had never agreed to. The oversized cream sweater she wore suddenly felt heavier than it had a moment ago. Ethan took another sip of his coffee and smirked. "I mean, seriously, I barely recognized you." A few customers glanced between them with quiet curiosity. No one knew the history behind the exchange. To them, it was simply an awkward encounter between old acquaintances. To Olivia, it was something far older and far more painful. She had spent 8 years listening to Ethan disguise cruelty as concern. 8 years hearing comments about her appearance delivered with a smile sharp enough to leave scars. 8 years learning how to shrink herself so someone else could feel bigger. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. "We've all changed a little," she said. But her eyes betrayed her enjoyment. Olivia looked at them both and felt the familiar ghost of humiliation stirring somewhere deep inside her chest. The ghost had once ruled her life. It had whispered that she was never pretty enough, never thin enough, never successful enough, never enough. But ghosts only had power when you invited them to stay. She took a slow breath. The scent of coffee filled her lungs. Beyond the rain-streaked glass, traffic moved steadily through the city. Life continued. The world kept turning. Ethan was still smiling, waiting for a reaction, waiting for embarrassment, waiting for victory. Olivia simply met his gaze. Calm, quiet, unreadable. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Confusion, perhaps, because this wasn't the woman he remembered. The woman he remembered would have looked down, apologized, tried to explain herself. This woman did none of those things. She offered a small, polite smile. "Hello, Ethan." That was all. No anger, no defense, no argument. Just 2 words. Yet somehow they seemed to disappoint him more than any confrontation could have. The silence stretched between them. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's grin tightened. Neither of them noticed the way Olivia's hand briefly drifted toward her stomach before returning to her side. Neither of them understood what she was protecting. Neither of them knew that beneath the soft folds of her sweater rested a secret capable of changing everything. And as the rain continued falling outside, Olivia realized something remarkable. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan Walker no longer had the power to define what she saw when she looked in the mirror. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as Olivia stepped out into the cool October afternoon. The rain had eased into a mist, leaving the sidewalk slick and shining beneath the gray sky. She pulled her coat a little tighter around herself and began walking toward the parking garage 3 blocks away. The city moved around her with its usual rhythm. Cars rolled past. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked the passing hour. Yet Ethan's voice still echoed in the corners of her mind. Not because his words mattered anymore, but because they were familiar. Familiar wounds had a way of reopening themselves even after years of healing. She paused at a crosswalk and stared at the red hand glowing on the pedestrian signal. For a brief moment, she was no longer standing in downtown Charleston. She was standing in the kitchen of the house she had once shared with Ethan. Morning sunlight had poured through enormous windows onto marble countertops. Fresh coffee had filled the air. It had looked like the picture of success, the kind of home featured in magazines, the kind of life people envied. Back then she had believed happiness was something you built through sacrifice. She remembered standing in front of the refrigerator holding a yogurt cup while Ethan scrolled through emails on his phone. Without looking up, he had said, "You should probably skip dessert tonight." Those little things add up. At the time she had laughed it off. It sounded harmless, practical even. But comments like that never stayed small. They accumulated quietly, like drops of water wearing away stone. Months later it became, "Maybe try a different dress." Then, "You looked better a few years ago." Then, "You are getting a little too comfortable." Comfortable. The word had always carried a hidden sting. It was never about comfort. It was about control. Olivia crossed the street as the signal changed and continued walking. Her reflection appeared briefly in a storefront window. For years, she would have automatically searched for flaws. Ethan had trained her to do that. Every perceived imperfection became evidence that she was somehow falling short. But now she saw something different. She saw strength. Not the loud kind that demanded attention. The quiet kind that survived disappointment and kept moving forward. A cool breeze drifted through the street. Instinctively, her hand settled against her stomach. A small smile touched her lips before fading again. The secret she carried had transformed more than her future. It had transformed the way she saw herself. Suddenly her phone vibrated inside her purse. The screen illuminated with a name that immediately softened the tension in her shoulders. Alexander Sterling. For a second, she simply stared at it. Then she answered. "Hey," she said quietly. His voice arrived warm and steady despite the thousands of miles between them. "I have been thinking about you all day," he said. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One voice had spent years making her feel smaller. The other somehow reminded her of her worth without even trying. She looked up at the cloudy sky as traffic moved past. "You would not believe who I ran into today," she whispered. On the other end of the line, Alexander became very still. And for the first time since leaving the cafe, Olivia felt the weight of the encounter beginning to lift. Alexander did not interrupt. He never did. Olivia could hear the faint murmur of an airport lounge somewhere on his end of the call, followed by silence as he moved to a quieter place. The sound alone told her everything she needed to know. He was listening, really listening. It was a quality she had once believed only existed in movies and novels. "Ethan," she finally said. The name felt strange now, like a book she had finished years ago but occasionally found sitting on a forgotten shelf. A few seconds passed. "Are you all right?" Alexander asked. Not what did he say? Not why was he there? Not any of the questions most people would ask. Just the one question that mattered. Olivia slowed her pace as she reached the parking garage entrance. Rainwater glistened on the concrete ramps leading upward. "I am fine," she answered. And surprisingly, it was true. She thought back to the cafe, to Ethan's smirk, to Vanessa's carefully disguised amusement. They had expected something from her. Embarrassment, hurt, maybe even tears. Instead, they had been left staring at a woman they no longer understood. "You do not sound convinced," Alexander said gently. Olivia smiled despite herself. "I think I am still surprised. About seeing him? About not feeling what I expected to feel." She stepped into the elevator and watched the metal doors slide shut. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected softly against the brushed steel walls. "For years I thought if I ever saw him again, I would fall apart." Her reflection stared back at her. Calm eyes, steady breathing, no panic, no shame. The elevator climbed slowly toward the fourth floor. "And?" Alexander asked. "And I did not." Silence settled between them again, comfortable and warm. Outside the elevator, thunder rumbled somewhere over the harbor. Autumn storms often rolled through Charleston this time of year, arriving suddenly and disappearing just as quickly. Olivia had always liked that about the city. It reminded her that difficult things passed. Eventually. "I am proud of you," Alexander said quietly. The words landed differently than compliments ever had with Ethan. They carried no hidden condition, no expectation, no transaction, just sincerity. Olivia felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. She unlocked her car and slipped into the driver's seat. The scent of leather and vanilla from the small air freshener greeted her. Familiar. Safe. Home. There is something else, she admitted. Vanessa was recording part of it on her phone. Alexander became silent again. This time the silence felt heavier. Olivia stared through the windshield at the rain beginning to fall once more. Tiny droplets scattered across the glass like scattered diamonds. I figured she would post it somewhere, Olivia continued. She always liked attention. And how does that make you feel? Alexander asked. Olivia considered the question carefully. A year ago the answer would have been simple. Terrified. Humiliated. Exposed. Now it was different. Strange, but different. She watched a young couple crossing the parking lot below, laughing as they shared an umbrella. Life moving forward. Always forward. Honestly, she said, I do not think it matters anymore. For the first time since leaving the cafe, she truly believed those words. Yet neither Olivia nor Alexander knew that. Somewhere across town, Vanessa was already editing a short video clip. A clip featuring Olivia standing silently beneath the warm cafe lights while Ethan laughed. A clip that would soon be viewed by thousands of people. And hidden within that video was one detail no one had noticed yet. Not Ethan. Not Vanessa. Not even the strangers preparing to watch. A detail concealed beneath a cream-colored sweater that was about to change everything. That evening the rain settled over Charleston like a soft gray blanket, wrapping the city in a quiet that felt almost sacred. Olivia stood by the window of her apartment, watching droplets slide down the glass in winding paths that caught the glow of streetlights below. The world outside looked blurred and distant, as though someone had painted it in watercolors. Her phone rested face down on the kitchen counter. No new messages. No new surprises. Just silence. For the first time all day, she welcomed it. She moved slowly through the apartment, passing shelves lined with books, framed photographs, and small reminders of the life she had rebuilt piece by piece after the divorce. Nothing here had been chosen to impress anyone. Nothing had been selected to meet someone else's standards. Every corner reflected her. Honest. Imperfect. Real. The scent of chamomile tea drifted through the air as she filled a mug and carried it toward the bedroom. A soft lamp glowed beside her nightstand, casting warm golden light across the room. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the harbor. Olivia opened the top drawer of her dresser and hesitated. For several seconds, she simply stared inside. Then she reached toward a large white envelope tucked carefully beneath a folded sweater. Her fingers lingered on the edge before she finally lifted it out. The paper felt familiar now. Precious. She sat on the edge of the bed and slowly opened it. Inside were several ultrasound photographs, black and white images that had already become the most important pictures she had ever owned. The first time she had seen them, she had cried so hard she could barely speak. Not because she was afraid, because for the first time in years she had felt hope arrive without conditions attached. She traced the edge of one image with her fingertips. To anyone else it might have looked like little more than shadows and shapes. To her, it was a future, a promise, a tiny heartbeat that had already changed everything. The memory returned vividly. 3 months earlier, the sterile scent of the doctor's office, the soft hum of medical equipment, the nervous anticipation twisting inside her chest. She remembered lying there, convinced her life was far too complicated for happiness. Then the monitor had flickered to life. A rapid heartbeat filled the room. Strong, steady, unmistakable. In that instant, every fear had become secondary. Every doubt had lost its voice. Olivia smiled softly as she looked down at the photographs. Her hand settled gently against her stomach. The movement felt instinctive now. Protective. Loving. Somewhere thousands of miles away, Alexander was crossing oceans and time zones, preparing to return home. He knew about the baby. He knew every doctor's appointment, every milestone, every tiny detail she shared. His excitement had never wavered. Neither had his support. Yet outside this apartment, almost nobody knew the truth. Not her coworkers. Not her neighbors. Certainly not Ethan. She glanced toward the dark window again. Somewhere across the city, Ethan probably believed he had won that encounter in the cafe. He probably thought he had successfully reminded her of the woman she used to be. Olivia looked back down at the ultrasound photograph and smiled. The irony was almost unbelievable. Ethan thought he had seen evidence of failure. What he had actually seen was the beginning of the most beautiful chapter of her life. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and the lingering scent of rain. Charleston seemed freshly washed, every brick sidewalk and wrought iron balcony gleaming beneath a clear blue sky. Olivia stood in her kitchen wearing a soft gray sweater, one hand wrapped around a mug of herbal tea while the other rested absent-mindedly against her stomach. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant cries of seagulls drifting inland from the harbor. For the first time in days, she had slept well. The weight of yesterday's encounter felt smaller now, as though the night had carried part of it away. Her phone vibrated against the marble countertop. A message illuminated the screen. Landing in New York. Connecting flight, leaves in 2 hours. I will see you tonight. Alexander. A smile appeared before she could stop it. It was a simple message. No grand declarations. No dramatic promises. Yet somehow it filled the room with warmth. She could almost hear his voice behind every word. Steady. Reassuring. Real. Olivia typed back a short reply and slipped the phone into her purse before heading toward the bookstore where she worked 3 days a week. The small independent shop sat on a quiet corner lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss. It smelled of old paper, polished wood, and fresh coffee from the café next door. It was one of her favorite places in the world. Here, nobody cared who she used to be. Nobody measured her against impossible standards. She was simply Olivia. Around noon, while organizing a display of new arrivals near the front window, her co-worker Emily appeared carrying her phone with an expression that immediately caught Olivia's attention. You might want to see this, Emily said carefully. Olivia's stomach tightened. Not from fear. From instinct. Emily turned the screen around. There it was. A video clip. The cafe. Ethan standing beneath warm pendant lights. Vanessa laughing nearby. Olivia remained silent as she watched herself on the screen. The video had already accumulated thousands of views overnight. Hundreds of comments flowed beneath it. Some praised Ethan's confidence. Others criticized his behavior. Many simply speculated about the story behind the encounter. Olivia stared quietly at the screen. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed. Emily blinked. That is not the reaction I expected. Olivia handed the phone back. Honestly, neither did I. She looked out through the bookstore window at pedestrians moving along the sunny sidewalk. Life continued exactly as it had before. The video had changed nothing. Yet somewhere across the city, Ethan was discovering the opposite. Because attention had always been his favorite currency. And now thousands of strangers were discussing a woman he believed he had left behind. A woman who had not argued, had not defended herself, had not given him the reaction he wanted. The silence that had disappointed him inside the cafe was now beginning to follow him everywhere. Olivia returned to arranging books, unaware that another notification had just appeared online. This one came from a prestigious charity foundation announcing its annual gala scheduled for the following weekend. The guest list included some of the most influential names in business, technology, and philanthropy. At the very top of the announcement was a name that immediately captured public attention. Alexander Sterling. And before long, another invitation would arrive. One addressed directly to Olivia Bennett. The invitation arrived 2 days later in a thick cream-colored envelope that looked far too elegant for Olivia's modest mailbox. She carried it upstairs along with a bag of groceries, setting everything on the kitchen counter before carefully opening the seal. The heavy cardstock inside announced the Sterling Foundation Annual Gala, one of the most prestigious charity events on the East Coast. Her name appeared beneath the invitation in graceful silver lettering. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then her phone rang. She already knew who it would be. I take it the invitation arrived, Alexander said. The sound of his voice immediately filled the apartment with warmth. Olivia smiled and walked toward the window overlooking the street below. The late afternoon sun painted the brick buildings across from her apartment in shades of gold and amber. You knew about this? She asked. I may have had some advance notice. She could hear the smile in his voice. Alexander Sterling, are you using your influence? Only for noble causes. Olivia laughed softly. The sound surprised her. There had been a time when laughter felt rare. A time when every conversation felt like a performance being judged. Alexander had changed that without ever trying. He had simply made space for her to be herself. Her gaze drifted toward the harbor. Visible in the distance, White sailboats moved across the water beneath a cloudless sky. The peaceful view stirred an unexpected memory. It had been almost a year earlier. A charity auction in Savannah. Olivia had attended reluctantly after a friend convinced her to go. At that point, she had spent nearly 2 years rebuilding her life after the divorce. She was functioning, healing, surviving, but trust still felt dangerous. The ballroom had glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Expensive perfume mingled with the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. Olivia remembered standing alone near a display of local artwork, quietly studying a landscape painting while avoiding conversations with strangers. Most people at events like that seemed determined to talk about themselves. Then a voice beside her had said, "Everyone keeps bidding on the famous pieces. Meanwhile, this one is the best painting in the room." She turned and found a tall man studying the artwork with genuine interest. No introduction, no attempt to impress her, no rehearsed charm, just an observation. Alexander. Back then she had no idea who he was. To her, he was simply a stranger in a navy suit discussing brushstrokes and color palettes. They spent 20 minutes talking about art before either mentioned careers. When she eventually learned his name, she nearly dropped her champagne glass. Alexander Sterling's reputation extended far beyond business magazines. Yet nothing about him matched the image she had expected. There was no arrogance, no need to dominate every conversation, no hunger for attention. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions and actually cared about the answers. Looking back now, Olivia realized that was the moment everything began to change. Not because he was wealthy, not because he was powerful, but because he looked at her as though she already mattered. She had spent years being treated like an accessory to someone else's success. Alexander had been the first person in a very long time who saw her as the main character of her own story. For a long time, Olivia had believed love was supposed to feel exhausting. Looking back, that realization hurt more than the divorce itself. It was astonishing how easily people could mistake endurance for devotion when they spent enough years doing it. The memory lingered with her throughout the week as preparations for the gala quietly unfolded. One evening, she sat alone on her balcony, watching the sun disappear behind the Charleston skyline, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt water from the harbor. Somewhere below, a jazz musician played on a street corner, the distant notes drifting through the warm air. It should have been a peaceful moment. Instead, old memories surfaced. The beginning with Ethan had been beautiful. At least that was how she remembered it. He had been charming, ambitious, confident. The kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately become its center of gravity. When they first met, Olivia had admired his drive. He spoke about the future with such certainty that being near him felt like standing beside a moving train. Powerful, exciting, impossible to ignore. In those early years, he brought her flowers for no reason. He called her in the middle of the day simply to hear her voice. He made her believe they were building something extraordinary together. And perhaps they were. At first. But somewhere along the way, ambition stopped being part of Ethan's personality and became his entire identity. Success was no longer something he wanted. It became something he needed. Everything else slowly moved into second place, including her. The changes arrived gradually. A comment here, a criticism there, small enough to dismiss, frequent enough to leave a mark. If Olivia was excited about a project, Ethan reminded her why it was unrealistic. If she celebrated an accomplishment, he explained how much further she still had to go. If she expressed insecurity, he somehow convinced her it was her own fault. The pattern became so familiar, she stopped recognizing it. "I am just trying to help you improve," he would say. "You are too sensitive." Or his favorite, "I am being honest because I care." Honest. That word had hidden behind countless wounds. Olivia remembered one particular evening years earlier. They had attended a corporate dinner overlooking the Charleston harbor. The restaurant had sparkled beneath crystal lighting. Expensive wine glasses reflected the city lights beyond the windows. She had spent nearly 2 hours getting ready. Yet when she emerged from the bedroom, Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "That dress is fine," he said. Fine. One simple word. Somehow it had managed to erase every bit of confidence she felt. Later that same night, she watched him compliment strangers with enthusiasm he rarely showed her anymore. The memory still stung. Not because of the dress. Because of what it represented. She had spent years chasing approval from someone who had already decided she would never fully deserve it. The realization arrived slowly after the divorce. Then all at once. Real love did not constantly keep score. Real love did not require someone to shrink in order for another person to feel important. Real love did not leave you questioning your worth every day. As the last traces of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, Olivia rested her hand against her stomach and smiled softly. Alexander had taught her that lesson without ever saying it aloud. And now, for the first time in her life, she finally understood the difference. By Friday afternoon, the city seemed to hum with anticipation. Posters for the upcoming charity gala appeared in hotel lobbies and storefront windows, while local news outlets discussed the event's celebrity guests and philanthropic goals. Olivia tried not to pay attention. She spent the day shelving books, helping customers, and reminding herself that life was larger than social headlines and public attention. Yet everywhere she turned, reminders appeared. During lunch, Emily held up her phone again. "You are not going to believe this." Olivia looked up from a stack of hardcover novels. The video from the café had spread even further. Millions of views now. Thousands of comments. News blogs had picked it up. Lifestyle influencers were debating it. Complete strangers were discussing her life as though they knew her. Some criticized Ethan's behavior. Others defended him. Most simply speculated. Olivia scanned the comments for a moment before handing the phone back. "People really have a lot of free time," she said with a small laugh. Emily shook her head. "I do not know how you are staying so calm." Olivia glanced toward the bookstore window where sunlight poured across the sidewalk outside. The answer was surprisingly simple. Because for once, her happiness was not connected to public opinion. That evening she returned home carrying a small shopping bag from a maternity boutique she had quietly visited after work. Inside were a few comfortable outfits and a tiny knitted blanket she had purchased impulsively. She placed the bag on the dining table and pulled out the blanket. Soft cream-colored fabric. Delicate stitching, small enough to fit across both hands. Her eyes lingered on it for several seconds. Suddenly the future felt very real. Not distant. Not theoretical. Real. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her heart immediately lifted. She opened the door and found Alexander standing in the hallway. Travel-worn but smiling. The scent of cedarwood and fresh air followed him inside. For a moment neither of them spoke. They simply looked at one another. The long flights. The busy schedules. The constant distance. None of it seemed to matter. Alexander stepped forward and wrapped his arms gently around her shoulders. "I missed you," he said quietly. Olivia closed her eyes. "I missed you too." Later they sat together on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The evening air was warm. Jazz music drifted faintly from a nearby rooftop restaurant. Alexander listened as Olivia described everything that had happened since the cafe encounter. The video, the comments, the attention. He remained calm throughout the entire story. Then he reached for her hand. "Do you regret staying silent?" he asked. Olivia considered the question carefully. The city sparkled below them like scattered stars. "No," she answered, "because I was never trying to win an argument." Alexander smiled softly. "Good. Why?" "Because the people who matter already know who you are." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. Somewhere deep inside, she realized he was right. Ethan still believed life was a competition, a scoreboard, a battle for appearances. But Olivia had stopped playing that game a long time ago. And as the lights of Charleston shimmered beneath the night sky, neither she nor Alexander noticed the newest headline appearing online. The Sterling Foundation had just released the final guest list for the gala. Alongside Alexander Sterling's name appeared another unexpected addition: Ethan Walker and Vanessa Hart. Saturday arrived bright and clear, the kind of southern autumn morning that made Charleston look like a postcard. Sunlight filtered through rows of oak trees while church bells echoed softly across the historic district. Olivia woke earlier than usual. For a few moments she remained still beneath the blankets, listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment around her. The steady rhythm of the ceiling fan, the distant hum of traffic, the faint clink of dishes coming from the kitchen where Alexander was already awake. A smile touched her lips. She found him standing by the stove making breakfast. The scent of coffee and toasted sourdough filled the room. Morning light streamed through the windows, outlining him in soft gold. When he looked up and saw her, his expression immediately softened. It was such a small thing. Such an ordinary thing. Yet Olivia never took it for granted. She had spent years with someone whose attention always felt conditional. Now she shared her life with someone whose kindness felt effortless. After breakfast, they walked slowly along the waterfront promenade. Sailboats drifted across Charleston harbor beneath a cloudless sky. Tourists moved between shops and restaurants while street musicians played near the old market. Everything felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. Olivia knew the gala was only days away. The event seemed to hover at the edge of every conversation, every news segment, every social media post. She could feel it approaching like distant thunder beyond a clear horizon. "Are you nervous?" Alexander asked as they paused near the water. Olivia considered the question. The breeze carried the scent of salt and sunlight. Pelicans glided above the harbor. "A little," she admitted. "About seeing Ethan?" She nodded. "Not because I care what he thinks anymore. I just do not want the evening to become something unpleasant." Alexander looked out across the water for a moment before answering. "Then do not give him that power." Simple, direct, yet somehow exactly what she needed to hear. Later that afternoon, while Alexander took a business call, Olivia settled into her favorite armchair with a book. The apartment felt warm and quiet. Safe. Her phone buzzed beside her. At first she ignored it. Then another notification appeared. And another. Frowning, she reached for the device. The newest article about the viral cafe video had just been published. This time the headline focused less on Ethan and more on her. Internet users had begun searching for information about Olivia Bennett. Old photographs surfaced online. Images from years ago, charity events, corporate functions, pictures taken during her marriage. Thousands of strangers were comparing the woman she used to be with the woman she had become. Olivia stared at the screen. Then her attention caught on a particular comment. It came from someone she had never met. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who refuse to perform their pain for an audience. Olivia read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Something about it stayed with her. Because it was true. She had spent years believing strength meant defending herself, explaining herself, proving herself. Now she understood something different. Real strength often looked like silence. Across town, Ethan Walker was reading the same article. And with every new comment praising Olivia's composure, a feeling he could not quite identify began settling uncomfortably in his chest. The night of the gala arrived beneath a sky scattered with stars. Charleston glittered with reflected light as luxury cars lined the circular entrance of the historic waterfront hotel hosting the event. Crystal chandeliers blazed behind towering glass windows while photographers gathered near the entrance, capturing the arrival of business leaders, philanthropists, and public figures from across the country. Inside, the ballroom shimmered in gold and ivory. Fresh white roses filled towering arrangements. The soft sound of a string quartet floated through the air above hundreds of conversations. Olivia stood before a mirror in one of the private guest suites upstairs. The emerald gown she wore flowed elegantly around her, its silhouette graceful and timeless. She studied her reflection quietly. Months ago, she would have worried about every detail. Tonight felt different. Her hand rested briefly against her stomach before she took a slow breath. Behind her, Alexander adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo and met her eyes through the mirror. "You look beautiful," he said. The compliment carried no performance, no calculation, just truth. Olivia smiled softly. "Thank you." Moments later, they entered the ballroom together. The reaction was immediate. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Not because Alexander Sterling was one of the most recognizable men in the room. Not entirely. People recognized Olivia as well. The woman from the viral video. The woman who had remained calm while the internet argued on her behalf. She felt curious glances follow them through the ballroom. But unlike years ago, she no longer felt the need to explain herself. Across the room, Ethan Walker noticed them almost instantly. He had arrived nearly an hour earlier with Vanessa on his arm, determined to enjoy the attention surrounding the event. Yet the moment he saw Olivia enter beside Alexander, something tightened inside him. Vanessa followed his gaze. Her smile faded slightly. "Well," she said lightly, "that is unexpected." Olivia looked radiant, confident, peaceful. The reaction irritated Ethan more than he cared to admit. He had expected the public attention from the cafe incident to fade. Instead, it seemed to have elevated her. Throughout the evening, guests approached Olivia and Alexander. Some discussed charitable initiatives. Others simply introduced themselves. Everywhere they went, people welcomed them warmly. Ethan watched from across the room, increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, he set down his drink. "I am going to say hello." Vanessa hesitated. "Are you sure that is a good idea?" Ethan forced a smile. "Why would it not be?" A few minutes later, Olivia was speaking with the director of a children's literacy foundation when she heard a familiar voice. "Olivia." She turned slowly. Ethan stood there wearing a polished smile. Vanessa remained beside him. For a moment, the surrounding noise seemed to soften. Olivia felt Alexander's presence beside her, calm and steady. Ethan glanced briefly at Alexander before returning his attention to Olivia. "Quite a night," he said. "You seem to be enjoying all this attention." The words sounded harmless on the surface. Beneath them lingered something else. The old tone. The old need to diminish. Olivia recognized it instantly. So did Alexander. Yet neither reacted. Ethan's smile sharpened slightly. Amazing what a little internet fame can do. Several nearby guests fell silent. Conversation slowed. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Olivia met Ethan's gaze. Calm. Unshaken. Then she smiled. "I am not here for attention, Ethan." The simplicity of her response seemed to catch him off guard. Around them, the ballroom sparkled beneath golden light. Somewhere across the room, a photographer raised a camera. And for the second time since their unexpected reunion, Ethan Walker found himself standing in front of an audience, while Olivia refused to play the role he had written for her. For a moment, no one spoke. The ballroom seemed suspended beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, every conversation around them slowing into a distant murmur. Ethan forced a laugh, the kind people used when they were trying to maintain control of a situation that was quietly slipping away. "Still the same, Olivia," he said. "Always so serious." Vanessa smiled politely beside him, but even she seemed uncertain now. The confidence they had carried into the conversation was beginning to crack. Olivia remained calm. Across the room, waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays while a jazz ensemble played softly near the stage. Everything appeared normal, yet something had shifted. Ethan could feel it. The audience he expected was not reacting the way he wanted. People were not laughing. They were watching. "I have to admit," Ethan continued, glancing briefly at Alexander, "you have certainly upgraded your social circle." The comment was delivered with a smile, but the implication lingered in the air. Several nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Olivia recognized the tactic immediately. It was familiar territory. The subtle insult disguised as humor. The carefully hidden barb. Years ago, she would have spent hours replaying every word afterward. Tonight, she simply felt tired. Alexander remained perfectly composed. "Olivia's company improves every room she enters," he said calmly. "That has nothing to do with social circles." Silence followed. Ethan blinked. Vanessa shifted her weight slightly. The response had been polite, respectful, impossible to argue with. Yet somehow it landed harder than any confrontation could have. Before Ethan could respond, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. The room gradually quieted as guests turned their attention toward the front of the ballroom. Spotlights illuminated the podium. The evening's fundraising presentation was about to begin. Olivia felt relieved by the interruption. She was ready for the conversation to end. As guests moved toward their assigned tables, Alexander gently offered his arm. Olivia accepted it. The movement caused the fabric of her gown to shift slightly as they crossed the ballroom. A woman seated nearby noticed first. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly before she leaned toward her husband and whispered something. Another guest glanced over. Then another. The realization spread quietly. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a series of small observations connecting together. The elegant gown. The way Olivia occasionally rested a protective hand against her stomach. The subtle curve that no longer appeared easy to dismiss. Ethan noticed the attention almost immediately. His eyes followed several curious glances directed toward Olivia. Confusion flickered across his face. Then he looked again, this time more carefully. The ballroom suddenly felt much quieter. Olivia remained focused on the stage, unaware of how many people were beginning to notice what had previously escaped them. Or perhaps she was aware and simply no longer cared. The distinction hardly mattered. Ethan stared from across the room. His expression shifted. Confusion became realization. Realization became disbelief. Vanessa slowly turned toward him. Neither of them spoke. Because for the first time since that afternoon inside the cafe, Ethan Walker understood something he had completely missed. The woman he had mocked was not hiding evidence of failure. She was carrying the beginning of a future. And judging by the calm confidence on her face, it was a future she could not wait to meet. The presentation continued beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, but Ethan barely heard a word. The applause rising and falling around the ballroom seemed distant now, muffled beneath the realization settling heavily inside him. Across the room, Olivia sat beside Alexander with a quiet confidence he could not remember ever seeing during their marriage. It was not the confidence that came from attention or admiration. It was something deeper, something steadier. Vanessa leaned closer. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Olivia. The elegant curve beneath the emerald fabric was no longer something he could ignore. Suddenly, memories from the cafe returned with painful clarity. The oversized sweater, the way she had rested a hand against her stomach, the calm expression that had never once broken. He had been so certain of what he was seeing, so eager to judge. Now that certainty felt embarrassing. On stage, the master of ceremonies invited Alexander Sterling forward to deliver the evening's closing remarks. Applause erupted throughout the ballroom. Alexander rose from his seat and made his way toward the podium. The room immediately shifted. He carried the kind of presence that never demanded attention because it naturally attracted it. Olivia watched him with a soft smile. Ethan noticed that too. Not admiration, not dependence, partnership. The distinction bothered him more than he expected. Alexander thanked donors, volunteers, and sponsors before speaking about the foundation's future projects. His voice remained calm and measured, filling the ballroom without effort. Then, near the end of his remarks, his gaze drifted toward Olivia. The change was subtle, yet everyone seemed to notice it. His expression softened. "Before we conclude tonight," he said, "there is one more person I would like to recognize." A quiet murmur passed through the audience. Alexander stepped away from the podium and descended from the stage. Hundreds of eyes followed him as he crossed the ballroom floor. Straight toward Olivia. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Vanessa stared openly now. The room seemed to hold its breath. Alexander stopped beside Olivia's chair and extended his hand. She accepted it. Slowly she stood. The applause that had filled the room moments earlier faded into complete silence. Alexander smiled at her with unmistakable pride. "Many people here know me because of business," he said. "Some know me because of philanthropy. But the greatest privilege of my life is standing beside this woman." Olivia's eyes widened slightly. She had not expected this. Around them, guests exchanged warm smiles. Several people were already reaching for their phones. Alexander gently placed his hand over hers. "She has taught me more about courage, grace, and strength than any success I have ever achieved." His gaze lowered briefly toward her stomach before returning to the audience. The gesture lasted only a second. It was enough. Understanding spread through the ballroom like sunlight breaking through clouds. Smiles appeared. Whispers followed. Then came applause. Warm, genuine, unstoppable. Ethan stood frozen. Not because a secret had been revealed, because he finally understood what he had failed to see from the beginning. Olivia had never been losing. While he remained obsessed with appearances, she had been building a life filled with love, purpose, and a future brighter than anything he had imagined. And standing in the center of that glittering ballroom, surrounded by admiration she had never asked for, Olivia looked happier than he had ever seen her. The gala ended beneath a sky filled with stars and the soft glow of Charleston's waterfront lights. Guests slowly drifted toward waiting cars, their conversations lingering long after the final applause had faded. Olivia stepped outside beside Alexander and paused at the top of the stone staircase overlooking the harbor. The night air felt cool against her skin. Sailboat masts swayed gently in the distance, their reflections trembling across the dark water. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking it all in. Not the attention, not the admiration, the peace. That was what felt remarkable. Real peace. The kind she had searched for without realizing it. Behind her, the ballroom doors opened and closed as guests continued leaving. Somewhere among them were Ethan and Vanessa. Yet Olivia felt no desire to look back. For years she had imagined what justice might feel like. She had imagined dramatic confrontations, perfect speeches, Moments where everyone finally understood her side of the story. The reality was much quieter. Justice felt like freedom. It felt like no longer needing validation from the people who once withheld it. Alexander stepped beside her and slipped his hand gently into hers. Neither of them spoke immediately. They watched the harbor together while the city lights shimmered across the water like scattered diamonds. "Are you happy?" he asked at last. Olivia smiled. The answer arrived effortlessly. Yes. It was the simplest word in the world, yet it carried years of healing inside it. Across the parking area, Ethan stood beside his car. Vanessa was speaking, but he barely heard her. His eyes drifted toward the staircase one final time. Toward Olivia. Toward the woman he thought he knew. The woman he had underestimated. The woman he had spent years convincing was not enough. Standing beneath the glow of the waterfront lights, she looked completely at peace. And for the first time, Ethan understood something painful. The version of Olivia he remembered no longer existed. She had outgrown the doubts he planted. She had outgrown the need for his approval. She had built a life that no longer revolved around his opinions. The realization settled heavily inside him. Not because she had found someone wealthy. Not because public opinion favored her. But because she had found herself. And there was nothing he could do about that. Olivia never saw him leave. She never watched his car disappear into the Charleston night. She was too busy. Looking forward. Weeks later, a framed ultrasound photograph would sit in a nursery filled with soft colors and morning sunlight. Months later, laughter would echo through rooms once occupied by silence. New memories would replace old wounds. New beginnings would grow where old disappointments once lived. Life would continue, as it always does. But on that quiet evening beside the harbor, one truth became impossible to ignore. Ethan believed she had gained weight. What she had actually gained was love, confidence, purpose, and a future brighter than anything he had ever imagined for her. She never sought revenge. She never needed to. Because while he was busy judging who she had become, Olivia Bennett was becoming someone extraordinary. And that was the ending he never saw coming.